Okay, ma'am. Police will respond. Stand by for a priority call. Break and enter in progress. Any units available to attend? Any units clear to attend?
Almost 4,000 calls are placed in 911 every day, and response times for police reached a staggering 22 minutes in 2023 and climbing. When seconds count, help us get there faster. Visit keeptorontosafe.com to let your city councillor know. Brought to you by the Toronto Police Association.
Hey, it's Sean Shapiro from Toronto Police Traffic Services. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of TPS Traffic Jam. It's the podcast where we talk about all things traffic and police. And today, joining me in studio, we have Jon Reid, president of the Toronto Police Association. Hey, John, how's it going?
Sean, thank you for having me today.
It's my pleasure. We're talking about important stuff, not traffic, not general policing. This is really important stuff that's affecting the city of Toronto.
Absolutely. And one of the key things I'd like to talk about today is the budget. So we've been talking about the budget now for several weeks, even months now. And one of the key pieces for us as an association, I think as a police service as well, we've been trying to educate the public here in Toronto as far as what's been going on with crime. And, you know, basically the position we are now is with our staffing. And if you look around now, the chief has come out, we've come out and pointed out to everybody, our response times are around 22 minutes for our priority one calls. Now, keeping in mind, you know, these are calls which are life and death calls. And in 18 of the 25 wards in the city of Toronto, it's even longer. So we've actually undertaken quite an aggressive campaign to try and educate the public. And we've been accused of maybe doing a bit of fear-mongering. That's not the case. We're using all the stats from Toronto Police Service to make sure people realize how important it is that we increase the staffing and make sure the Toronto Police Service approved budget is exactly what our members need to get the jobs done.
The stats are amazing. And I mean amazing in terms of they're scary. 22 minutes for average response time. I saw a tweet where there was somebody doing a carjacking, and it said, don't worry, we'll be there in 22 minutes. When you put it into perspective, that has a real-world consequence.
It does. And I think if you start looking at what's really happened over the last little while, so in the last couple of years, we've seen theft of cars go up. And unfortunately, as you and I both know, crime tends to kind of morph, and it moves along. So we went from car thefts to carjackings, and now we're to the point now where we actually have people doing home invasions for car keys. And the fact that it might take our officers upwards of 22 minutes to get to those calls, or any call, is unacceptable to our members. And it should be unacceptable to the residents of Toronto, which I believe it is. But more importantly, the councillors here in Toronto and the mayor need to know that people in Toronto are not going to accept that. And we need to make sure that money, which the chief has spoken about, we've spoken about, is actually allotted to the police service.
It's that money that's going to allow for new police officers to be hired so that we can have the appropriate number of officers available for calls. Because one of the stats that I saw was we have 600,000 new residents, but roughly 37 new officers in relation to the time frame. So,
yeah, and I believe that stats from 1999 till now, we're probably plus around 37 to 38 police officers, which once again is astounding. And another stat I'd like to point out to you as well is, you know, I think when you look at the 2010 stats, back then, we were about 208 officers per 100,000 people here in Toronto. If we still had that cop-to-pop ratio, we would have an additional 1,600 police officers right now. But right now, we're running around 5,100, so we'd be looking around 6,700 police officers. And that's just to make sure we had, you know, the correct staffing piece that we did back in 2010, but we don't have that right now.
You know, we hear from the public where there's never a cop around when you need one. Or I get comments on our Ask a Traffic Cop live stream all the time. You know, why aren't you stopping more people for any number of different offenses? And the truth is, we're busy. We're going call to call. We're going serving in a priority sequence to the calls that are out there, and we don't have the extra staff to do all the other things that we'd like to do.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. You know, our men and women are out there doing the best job they can with what the city is providing them. And they're going call to call to call. And I'll be very honest, it's impacting people's mental health. You know, to go from one traumatic call to another traumatic call to another traumatic call has an impact on people. And I think it's critical that, you know, we recognize it as an association, the service recognize it as an organization, that we kind of make sure we have the proper staffing, equipment, and supports for our members to go out and do this job. Because you and I both know it's a very, very difficult job.
It's an amazing job, but it is difficult, and it does take a toll. It has a real cost to the individual who's performing the function.
Yes.
And that's a whole different conversation with mental health. But let's talk more about what's happened. $20 million was approved by the board. The city didn't go for it. Now there's a discussion as to, I guess, trying to go somewhere in the middle or trying to get the entire amount. But what does that mean? We don't get that money. it means we don't get a raise? Does it mean that we don't go to calls? Does it mean we don't hire new officers? What's the actual result of that lack of funding?
So just what I'd like to kind of clarify is the kind of semantics of going back and forth at City Council. So what actually happened was we were provided by City Council. They said they were going to give us $7.6 million above our last year's budget. Now that is an increase, yes. But I will remind everybody, there was actually the Police Services Board had all the information. They were provided with all the details from the service. And the Police Services Board approved $20 million more, which is only a 1.7% increase over last year. Now, that $20 million is earmarked essentially to allow us to go out and hire 360 new police officers, so 4 classes of 90 for 2024. Mm-hmm. And why this is so critical is those officers are actually going to provide a pipeline of experienced officers that we can bring into the service and deal, for the future. Because what we're going to end up running into is retirements and attrition. So the officers will retire. Some officers will leave for other services. And quite frankly, some people will just get out of policing altogether. Mm-hmm. Now, on average here in Toronto, we lose anywhere from about 200 to 230 officers a year. And that's a massive amount of police experience that goes out the window. And I think it's important that everyone understand it's very important to keep the flow of new officers coming in to replace the old. Mm-hmm. Now, keep in mind also, when the new officers come in, they don't have that experience. And if you look at our front line right now, probably 25% of our front line has 5 years or less. So I think it's important to understand those officers need to make sure we have the appropriate support, and that's also making sure we have the appropriate supervision as well on the road, which means we have to have enough sergeants to make sure when those officers have questions or a situation arises they need some kind of direction, we have the proper resources there to support them.
Something that many people don't understand or may not understand, and it was something that the chief just mentioned on social media or one of the addresses recently, was that it takes about 6 months to get an officer through the paces. And that's not making them an experienced officer. That's getting them a new recruit that can actually start being a police officer. It's not an overnight thing, and it's not easy to find people who want to put on a uniform and are capable of doing the job. So there's all sorts of issues with not hiring beyond that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you start looking at who wants to be a police officer, obviously we've undergone over the last probably 5-7 years a lot of events which have kind of tainted the policing profession. I, like you, always wanted to be a police officer my entire life. It's the best job going, right? Undoubtedly for me it is. But I think it's important to understand that because of those events, it did kind of lose its luster. And it's important, I think, for people to understand it is such a rewarding job and it's a good job to have. And I think it provides a lot of benefit to the community and also individually to the person.
It's the best job there is. And it's a career with many different opportunities within. But you still have to have those people coming through, having the interest and getting the support, and then not being run till they can't function. And that's a huge part of it. So what's next? What happens with where we are and where we need to be? What do we do next?
So I think, as you and I know, because we've both been on the job a fair bit of time, the service has undergone a period of time where they've done mass hiring, then they don't hire anybody. We need to change the way we do business. And when I say that, what I mean is we need to consistently hire. So some years we're going to be up bodies, some years we're going to be down. And we have to accept that and get away from this hire, don't hire, don't hire. Because we end up with these massive shortage of police officer and skill sets as well when we do this.
We figure the average age of someone coming through was 34 years, at least a couple of years ago.
Yep.
If you have 90 people who get hired together that are roughly the same age, they all leave the job at roughly the same age. So you have to replace them with the same pocket of officers to fill the space. Otherwise, you can't hire. If you're not hiring at the same rate, you're going to lose faster than you gain, and that's a huge problem with that. So is the discussion still alive? Are we still in a position where we can get the funding? Is the discussion open? It's negotiations. What happens and how can we help?
So right now, the discussion is live. I think there's a discussion still going on at City Hall. I know the councillors, some of the city councillors are actually looking at it and picking up the torch and explaining, this is important to them. It's important to their constituents. And that needs to be brought to City Council. It needs to be brought to the mayor. So my hope is it's going to be rectified. We'll find out on February 14th, I believe is the date, when the budget will be finalized and see where it goes. But I think ultimately, there's a duty. A lot of people don't realize there's actually a duty on Police Services Board and the city to provide adequate and effective policing for an area.
And we're the second largest police service in Canada. I believe that's still our stat. At the very least, we're the largest municipal police service in Canada. And if we're not in a position to protect because our community because of the lack of funding, that we're handcuffed. We can't do the job we want to do.
Absolutely. And a lot of people don't actually realize we're actually the fourth largest municipal police service in North America.
Wow.
And when you think about all the places in the United States, we are a very large service. We deal with a very large population, a diverse population as well. And we do a really good job. Mm-hmm. Our men and women are really well trained. They do an excellent job, but we need to make sure they're supported. We need to make sure when they come to work each and every day, they have the best equipment, best training, and also they're appropriately staffed to do their job.
Well, that's how you can get the best service.
Absolutely.
It really comes down to the community wants to feel safe. They want to have the response times, the phone's answered when they call. All those things have a cost. And I can't imagine anyone who lives in the city or commutes and spends time in the city want less response and less funding for the police that are there to help them.
Yep, no, I agree with that. I think we're finding now that a lot of the communities, now they're hearing the possibilities of cuts. They're actually putting their hands up and they're coming to the microphone and they're saying, no. We want more police in our communities. And another important piece to consider as well is, when we have police officers going into communities, we can't have them just going in to arrest people and just going into for some kind of enforcement action. It's important for officers to have the time to go into community and work with the community, be part of that community as well and build those community relationships because those go so far as assisting the community, assisting everybody, the people within those communities as well.
Everything is relationships. So what we do here, even though it's electronically, we're speaking to a community that has an interest in what we do, and it's amazing to see that blossom. But if we don't talk to people, if we don't share this information, if we're not out in the communities doing the amazing work that officers do every day on the ground, it creates such a disconnect that no one knows what's happening, and they can't possibly understand what our perspectives are.
You're absolutely right. And we, as an association, we've gone through great lengths to show all the stuff that Toronto Police Service brings to the City of Toronto. Unfortunately, people just see frontline police officers, kind of Toronto Police, that's the end of it. But there's so much more to Toronto Police. We have our parking enforcement officers, we have our court officers, we have our civilian officers, in the background. We have our special constables, we have our district special constables. All these different areas of the police service, make Toronto Police Service work. And they're all integral pieces, and they're so important. And we've really tried to bring that out to the forefront to show the public the value you're getting, quite honestly, for their money, for their tax dollars. And I think we bring great value to the City of Toronto, great value to each and every person here.
There's so many people who reach out and say that they don't think that we're the right thing. They don't think we're doing a good job. They may be making that statement without knowing what actually happens on a daily basis. In fact, I think in order to have that belief, you have to be operating without all the information. So where can people go to get more information to really understand? I mean, they're watching this, they're getting some information. But if you were going to send them to a resource so they could really understand what we do in a day, the Toronto Police Service website has loads of information about the type of things we do. It doesn't really talk about budget issues. Mm-hmm. Your social media has tons of information, and they can check you out, right?
Yeah, so they actually go onto our website and our social media feed as well, where we've actually been producing videos to actually show what the different areas of Toronto Police Services bring. But to your point, there's a lot of tasks people think, well, if I detask the police, that's going to resolve and solve this problem. And one of the particular areas we look at is like mental health. So mental health, we do approximately 35,000 mental health calls a year. And of those calls, only 1% of them are actually eligible to be diverted to non-police. And a lot of people don't realize that. So we end up with a radio call for mental health call, whether it's violence, threat of violence. The police must go.
It's funny you bring up mental health calls, and so many people think that we could spend money better if we spent it on alternative forms of response, whether it be nurses or doctors, and not involve the police. But when it involves violence, they're not going to go in unless police are there. So we're there anyway.
That's right. And I think, is there a path for other alternative response? Yes, there is. But we really have to get away from the this or that mentality. It's got to be this and that. We need to make sure that the mental health resources out there and the police can work together so that they can pass it off to the police, and the police can also pass it off to those alternate response people.
But those alternate response people and the people we currently work with they're partners. We work with them. It's not us or them. They're not two separate silos, completely independent of one another. It's all part of the big machine, and that is to get people the help they need.
That's right. When you start looking at the MCIT program, excellent. With that, we have a nurse and we have police officers that work together, and they actually work with police officers and they're a resource once again. And that program has worked very, very well now, I think for over 20 years.
Wow.
Which I think is really important to look at. And, I would like to also point out that predominantly almost a very massive amount of the calls we deal with, they actually get resolved without any issues. Unfortunately, that we end up in a position where it's only the negative calls or the calls that don't work out very well that end up being in the media.
Yeah, we don't get credit for the millions of calls we deal with that are perfect and everyone goes home happy,
Correct,
getting the help that they need. And that's really sad. They don't make TV shows or newsreels about the good stuff nearly as often as the bad. And those are the outliers. Those are the very few that get a bright light shone on them. So that's unfortunate.
Yes.
Okay, so going to your social media, to your website, and we'll put that on the screen. If people really want to be heard, what's the course of action? Who do they call to try and motivate their representatives to either, if they're not supporting the police, to support the police?
Yep. So if you want to go onto our social media platforms, there's a link there, and you can actually contact your city councilors. So one of the things we've tried to do with our education piece is we've sent out cards to every household in Toronto to make sure that they know what this particular situation is now with public safety. We've also launched the campaign, which people may or may not have heard on the radio, which is some radio ads. And these ads I find are very impactful.
Sure.
Some people don't feel they're appropriate, but they're a reality. When somebody's calling 911 and your house is being broken into, you want somebody there now. You don't want them there in 22 minutes. But that's where we are right now, and that's an important thing.
I'm now getting questions of what can I do to defend myself because the police aren't coming fast enough. People are asking me what the laws are about weapons, about self-defense. This is new. This is new and very recent that these kind of questions are coming across a traffic cop's live stream. So I've seen a shift in the concerns that the public are making known, and that's kind of unsettling to think that people are already trying to make plans for what if.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head. It's funny you mention that because I've actually heard a couple of times recently on the radio, one of our media relations people, they've actually been on the radio and speaking about when they're leaving for 4 o'clock in the morning. They used to worry about going out and maybe bumping into a raccoon. They're actually going outside now with the mindset of bumping into somebody else or something's going on which they may have to deal with. And I think to your point, that's only really come about over the last year or so. And I think that is very unsettling, I think, for everybody. And that's not our Toronto, right? That's never been my experience in Toronto. But the fact that's happening now is concerning.
You bring a good point. Our police aren't just police when they're at work. We're police officers 24/7. We have responsibilities to act. And we don't just turn it off like a light switch when we go home. So things that are happening in the community, things we might have to deal with, are happening even if we're off duty.
That's right. We've had that experience several months ago. We had a police officer at a Best Buy. That officer was there, and he ended up intervening in a theft. And as a result, he was actually stabbed. But our officers were out there 24/7 doing a great job. But they put their life on the line each and every day. And I think any police officer, that goes to work, they understand in the back of their mind, there's a chance they may not come home. But that's their job. They signed up for it. So they're not arguing that point. But we owe it to these police officers, to the men and women out there, to make sure they're properly trained, equipped, and staffed to give them the best possibility of getting their job done and coming home to their families.
You just triggered a thought, and that is, while we as civilians at home are calling for service and looking for help, there's police officers who could be in a jackpot looking for help on the radio, and if we are understaffed, they are not getting the response they need, and they have a priority call. They have a radio to say, I need help, and they may not have sufficient staff to be able to. Obviously, we do. People will come, but knowing that there would be more sufficient staffing means that everybody's safer, not just the civilians in their homes, but officers on the street.
Absolutely, and that's once again, the key pieces we need to look at is with the large increase in population here in Toronto, that's just creating more calls for service. And I think we have to make sure if we have the right staff, it's better for everybody. It's better for our day-to-day officers on the road for their safety. It's better for the public safety. And I think, quite honestly, and I've heard arguments that having more police officers on the roads is not going to deter crime. I disagree. I really honestly disagree. I'd love to see more police officers when you're out driving around, because the reality now, we're so short, you don't see a lot when you're driving around because they're actually tied up doing radio calls.
Absolutely. People are telling me that they pass police officers while speeding on the road. They're admitting to their poor driving, and they're surprised that they haven't been pulled over. So because they haven't been pulled over, they believe that it's okay to do whatever they're doing. But they don't realize that vehicle might be en route to a call, might be transporting a prisoner, might be otherwise occupied, and that they don't have the bandwidth to pull you over because there's somebody waiting who needs more help. And that's one of the things I try and drive home. Be respectful, be responsible on the road. We want people to be safe there, because anything that goes wrong on the road is another call for service. And if you can avoid being a reason that police officers need to engage you, we can go help other people.
Yep, absolutely. And it's so important for people to kind of drive cooperatively when they're driving around. Follow the rules of the road. I don't know about you, but I've noticed stop signs. Stop signs don't seem to mean stop anymore. And this seems to be a rampant thing across the city these days, which is concerning to me once again, especially for pedestrians.
They'd be referred to as stoptionals.
Yes.
I've seen a big problem with people making right turns at stop signs, not coming to a stop at all. In fact, I spoke to the automated enforcement group. They've been talking about people getting multiple red light camera tickets as they circle the block waiting for people running the stop sign, or red light, I should say, repeatedly. Yeah, we need to have some back to basics retraining, and for drivers, we need to do some more enforcement. But a lot of that happens because there's just not enough people to do all the things that need attention.
Yep, I agree with you. And I think the reality is, once again, to your point, if someone gets away with it once, then it ends up becoming the new norm.
That's right.
And the new standard.
Yeah, it's concerning on all levels in all areas of policing, and it should be concerning for everybody who goes out on the road every day and wants to get where they're going and back home again safely. When things start falling apart or eroding and it affects every element. It's not just 911 calls. It's not just people who are violent or have mental health issues. It's all areas. When you need help, you want that help. You need police officers to be available and ready to respond, and that's just not where it should be right now. We can't do everything we need to do, and that's unfortunate. I want to be able. The reason I became a cop is to help people.
Yes.
And I know that many of the officers I speak to, and I'm sure even the ones I don't speak to, they're frustrated.
Yeah, that frustration is definitely out there. They're out there doing the best they can with what they have. But I think the expectation, from the public is they do more. But we can't put that onus on them unless we support them. And that's once again where we come back to this budget issue. We have to ensure the City of Toronto, through budgetary resources, support policing. Right? Policing is an important piece. You can't just pull a police officer out of the wrapper, put him in a car. Mm-hmm. Does not work that way. It takes years of training to get them from being hired, get them into police college, through the police college. They have a period of training on the road now. Once they've completed their training on the road, then they'll start their policing career. Right? But that takes time and experience. We wouldn't take someone out of medical school and have them doing surgery.
Why not? Seems like a great idea. They got Google and everything.
Yeah.
It's great. We've talked about police, and that is the big title. That's what we're called, the Toronto Police Service. But we're more than police. We have all sorts of other people that make this machine work. What does this budget affect? Is it just the police officers, or is it more?
It's a great question. And, Sean, this is everybody in the police service. And a lot of people don't understand. All they see are the frontline police officers in the car that comes around. They see them around in the streets. We have 911 operators, right? An integral part of our operation. We have members that work at the garages, keep our cars running each and every day. And keep in mind, those cars run 24/7 on the road. They look after the motorcycles, the bicycles. We have our parking enforcement officers. We have all our members, the court officers, to look after court wagons, which transport prisoners around. We have special constables at the units. We have court officers within the courts. We have our document services personnel. These are all pieces of the machine that make Toronto Police what it is and allow it to actually work as smoothly as it does. And it's so important for people to understand there's more to the service, and these other people work within the service.
We're almost like a city into itself. There's jobs happening, people behind the scenes. You don't realize how the sausage is made, what goes into it. At the end of the day, you just care about the police officer coming to solve your problem. But it is the call taker, the dispatcher, the police officer, the mechanic, the radio technician. It's the parking enforcement officers that keep the roads moving. It is so much more than just police. It doesn't do it justice. There's a lot under, and frankly, our civilians don't get the recognition that they deserve, because we can't do the job without them. And they're all covered under the same umbrella of we need to make sure that we have enough people to allow us to do our job.
Yep, absolutely. And you say that very correctly from the perspective of we need to ensure that all these people, get the recognition they need, but also the public understand, there's so much more that goes into our service, that brings the service delivery to their front door.
It's not magic.
No.
But it
a
feels
lot of
like
work.
it sometimes. Yeah, well, it's a ton of work. Okay, we've got. I think just in that last bit, a better understanding of hopefully of what goes on to make it work. Because we watch movies, and that's where we get most of our information as to how policing is. We race to the scene, we solve crime in a 30-minute episode, and we move on to the next day, have a couple of donuts, and come back to work. But there's so much more, and all of those things require staff, and enough staff. I love, as we talk about the television, you always follow the one or two detectives who show up, and there's an army of people. That show would look very different if there wasn't an army of support there.
Yes.
Very rarely is it just two people, and that's the entire show, and there's nobody else involved. There's so much that goes into policing behind the scenes, even to the point of just looking up information administratively.
Yeah. There's people that run the computers, all these logistics that run in the background. You're absolutely correct.
And we want all of those people to be able to do their jobs. And very often it's tons of overtime and extra work that goes to the same people, and we're working them hard. It's not that they're not fed, but they're doing more than is what is normal, just to keep the system running.
You're absolutely correct. And see, once again, that is a product of lack of staffing. If we had the appropriate number of people, they'd be working there 40 hours a week, and they get their job done and go home. The problem we run into now is where we don't have enough people, they're working 50, 60 hours a week. Our officers are having to work 12-hour shifts and then drawing overtime on top of that. And I'll tell you, our members don't want overtime to that degree. It's 12-hour shifts, a long shift, and it's important for people to understand, that the way the shifts are designed, they have to be staffed appropriately for them to work properly. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the reasons we actually need, more officers to make sure things are appropriately staffed.
And for the people who say, well, overtime means more money, they should be happy. Well, that's great sometimes. But you can't live life where you're only at work, you're coming back home, you're crawling into bed and you're repeating the next day. You're going to burn out. And then we're going to see officers who get hurt or don't come back to work because there's other issues. It will break the system, and then we'll have a situation that is far worse than what we're in right now.
Yep. And also when you start looking at frontline policing is a very dynamic function. When you get a radio call, and anyone that's been in the job for a while knows you get a radio call is rarely what the original call was. There's always something else to it. But these can go sideways very, very quickly, and it's important to make sure that people are alert. They're not, dog-tired after working too much overtime the last couple of days, and now they have to deal with this. We're only responsible for half the input for these interactions we have when we go to these calls. So we have to make sure our members are in the right place in their mindset, and also, staffed and equipped properly.
Yeah, you want the full of energy, happy officer showing up at your call, and not the person that has been working 6 hours overtime and can barely keep his eyes open. We're talking about your safety as well. It's great to have someone show up, but you want someone who's fit for duty.
Correct.
I've heard you talk about adequate and effective policing, but what is that really?
So adequate and effective policing is laid out in the Police Services Act, and it actually designates what services level must be provided by a police service. And right here in Toronto, we're currently not meeting that standard. And that should concern us, which it does, the police service, which it does, but also should concern every citizen here in Toronto because they deserve better.
We know that the silent majority supports the police, and it's phenomenal. We appreciate it. But we can't have them be silent anymore. If they want to speak up, if they want to be heard, which I think they have to at this point, how do they get in touch with you? How do they get in touch with the people that need to hear that voice?
So I would ask anybody that's interested, go to our website, keeptorontosafe.com. On that website, it'll give you a link where you can access your specific counselor within your ward. You can either email them and or call them. And we would encourage anybody, please call, let them know how you feel. It's critically important that we have the silent majority actually raise their voice so people in City Hall know what you want done with your tax dollars.
They are not mind readers. They need to hear from you. Otherwise, change doesn't happen.
Absolutely.
Social media is fantastic. We hear so many comments. What kind of response have you been getting? Have you been hearing from people?
Lots of people, and it's great to see, but we want more. We need to make sure, we have over 3 million people here in Toronto. We want everybody to come out, make your voice heard.
The Toronto Police Association has been doing an incredible job on social media, delivering stats and info that I've learned from. Like, I wasn't aware of that 22-minute response time until I saw the campaign go across. I wasn't aware of the change in not only population, but that we only have an effective 37 new officers in that time frame, because that hits home. So what kind of response have you been getting? Like, is there a lot of feedback on social media?
We've had a great response both through our website and also responses that have gone out to the councillors through both email and both phone calls. And I would encourage anybody here in the city of Toronto, right? We have over 3 million people here in the city. Get out there, have your voice heard. We want to see you go to our website, keeptorontosafe.com, locate your ward, locate your councillor, email them and call them.
This is all for you. And I say for you being the community. It's your voice being heard so that you can get the safe and effective policing that you need so that you can feel safe in your own city.
Absolutely. This is to make sure you get the policing that you want and you certainly deserve. Mm-hmm.
The Toronto Police Association protects its members, but it really protects the community as much, because we can't protect the community unless we're protected and doing working at our highest and best. I don't think that the average person realizes how important the Toronto Police Association is to them, because in a roundabout way, the Toronto Police Association is representing the entire city.
Absolutely. And our job is to protect our members that are out there each and every day, protecting the citizens of Toronto. And that's one of the key pieces. If our members are out there and they're equipped, staffed, trained properly, they can bring their best game to work each and every day, and then provide the best service and levels of service for the citizens of Toronto.
Once upon a time, you had to live in the city of Toronto to work here. And now we have a lot of officers who live in and around the city. But the issues that are affecting the community are affecting police officers, not just at work, but as citizens themselves. Because every morning they have to make sure their car is in the driveway when they come to work. These things aren't isolated. We're affected by the same issues as individuals, as everybody else who lives in the city of Toronto.
Yeah, and I think that's, unfortunately, the reality of living in Toronto, living here in the GTA now. I think we've seen crime on the rise. I look at it myself, and I see there doesn't really seem to be any responsibility or any consequence now for a lot of the individuals. Now we've seen things, such as the robberies that take place within malls. We didn't see those years ago, and now they're becoming more and more frequent. And these are, I think the most recent one we had down at Sherway Gardens was at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And I think the fact that people are actually, taking these, committing these crimes during these hours of the day is a direct reflection of how they feel about getting caught. They're not concerned. And that should be a concern for everybody here in Toronto.
Well, that is the, what do they call it? The canary. That is the example. If there was more police to respond, if there was, more officers patrolling and not tied up on calls, maybe they wouldn't feel so confident in being involved in these brazen attacks. Yeah. It really is an example, a shining example of where the criminal believes the police force is.
Yes. And I think that's one of the key pieces which we look back on. It's the broken window theory. If we have enough police officers around and we take care of our communities and look after them, the communities will basically look after themselves. But we have to make sure these communities are supported with the right number of police officers in the right place at the right time.
The Toronto Police really is the police service of the people. We are the city's police service. We serve them. We're effectively theirs. So if you were running a company, or if you had a business, you'd want to make sure your business ran properly to support you as the business owner. Well, everyone in the city of Toronto's got a vested interest in how well we do, because in turn we do well for them. It's so connected. But I think a lot of people have been sitting at the sidelines going, well, that's their problem. And by the way, can you please come, deal with my parking issue? And by the way, can you please come and deal with my stolen car? But there's a disconnect. And what really has to happen is people have to realize that this is a problem, that they have a voice that can make change because it's their police service.
Absolutely. And that's, I think, very well said. I think it's important for people to understand that, to your point, if they have the ability to impact how policing can be done here in Toronto and how it's going to be funded, they should take that opportunity. And I think this right now, through keeptorontosafe.com, is their opportunity. Have their voice heard, make sure that they get the police service and the service they want within the City of Toronto.
And this is probably for another time, but there's so much that we do within the community, so many programs, so many amazing opportunities to join with and do things to benefit the city. This is something that's limiting all those extracurricular things that we used to be involved in. I remember when we had barbecues and fun days, and I mean, those were things we could do when we had enough staff, that we had the extra officers available to do this stuff. We don't have that anymore. We used to be involved in so many programs that, because of our staffing shortages, we've had to reduce the availability to. We just can't do all those fun things. I remember Blinky, as a kid, education programs in schools. That's gone. And it's gone because we can't support those programs. And they're important programs. My wheelhouse is traffic safety. Well, we don't have the sufficient staff to do what we used to do. And yeah, is it getting a T-shirt or a flyer or a coloring book, does that change anything? Maybe. But we're not going to know if we don't do it anymore. It's been so long. And those are all positive memories for me. It's part of what made me want to be a police officer, all those positive interactions with police, developing relationships so that as a kid I knew that was someone I could go and get help from. A lot of that's just falling apart. We're getting this divide because we don't have the interaction, because we don't have those available officers to high five and do the fun stuff. That fun stuff's part of policing. It's actually a vital part of developing relationships in communities. It's not, as you said earlier, it's not just about 911 and arresting somebody. There's so much more that goes into making this a safe and sustainable environment for everyone so that you can live, work, and play safely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that would actually be a show on to itself, quite honestly. Showing all the extra work that our men and women do in conjunction with communities. Because our communities are screaming for more police officers within their community, especially the neighborhood officers. But when you start looking at things that have been lost, like the crew officers, we used to have officers almost every division who will be out riding around on bikes, engaging with communities, with local businesses. We've lost that in almost all of our divisions, apart from the downtown core. That's one cut. And that still has not taken or provided enough frontline support. So unfortunately, with this budget, if we end up in a position where the budget's not granted, the chief's going to have to look at different cuts, and that may end up being some of the neighborhood officers as well, apparently.
And those they're doing such important work developing those relationships. It's so much. It's different. The neighborhood officer program is phenomenal. I just can't. I can't even get into how impressed I am with it, and how the people who have been touched by it have come forward saying that they love it. Like it's really one of those heartwarming things where people suddenly know their officer. There's ownership. They know them. That would be very sad if it had to go away.
Yes, it would.
There's also those Cops and Kids programs where officers are volunteering their time above and beyond, and now their overtime is cut into their ability to give their time to these kids programs that they're so passionate about. There's just so much more, and it all sort of starts with how the foundation is. If we don't have enough people, and we can't build a house where we can, do all the things we want to do.
Yes.
This is great. I'm glad that we had a chance to sit and talk about these things. Again, people can go to keeptorontosafe.com, and that's how they can get in touch with the people they need to get in touch with so that they can have their voices heard, so they can make sure that that everyone understands just how important the Toronto Police Service and the budget and their safety is to them.
Yes.
911, do you need police, fire, or ambulance?
Police?
What's your emergency?
I can't see her. Where is she? I don't know where she is.
Who can't you see?
My daughter? She was here a second ago. I think she's missing.
Try to stay calm. We can have units there in 22 minutes.
When you call us, we want to be there. The current response time for police is a staggering 22 minutes and climbing. When seconds count, help us get there faster. Visit keeptorontosafe.com to let your city councillor know. Brought to you by the Toronto Police Association.